Okay, good evening, everyone. Before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. Our speaker tonight is Peter Baum. As you know, he'll be talking about Israel, and he loves being asked questions. So when you have questions during the evening, please either click on the electronic hand that you'll find in the participants app, or if you prefer, you can write in the chat app, and we'll pick it up from there. We don't allow smoking anymore, so please bear that in mind. Right, now Peter Baum. Peter has worked in banking, international auditing and fund management. His life has been spent many years already working abroad, mainly in the Far East and Middle East, as well as many Muslim countries. He now devotes most of his time to pro-Israel activism. He's a Southend-on-Sea representative. He's on the board of deputies and the Chapter of the Southend Friends of Israel, sorry, which we're all welcome to join later, but we'll discuss that with you. And he's chair of Fair Reporting, a low-key but active anti-Israel media monitored by group. He writes for many online publications. He appears regularly on Revelation TV and on local radio. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, David, and good evening to all of you in Edgware. And it's an honour and privilege to be able to address you tonight. So I'll dispense with the introduction because David has done that, and I'll get straight into how I got involved into pro-Israel political activism. And it was really in 2014 at the Gaza War, and my community, Southend and Westcliff Hebrew Congregation, which numbers some 600 plus families, were absolutely outraged at the lack of leadership within the Jewish community from our Jewish MPs, Jewish lords, and from the clergy and organisations such as the Board of Deputies. And also we were nauseated and bewildered by the constant negative and sometimes spiteful media coverage of Israel. Now, never before have our community got up and been active, and we called a meeting, and I was asked to speak at that meeting just to give our view to the members of our council, our MP, about what we thought about the barrage of disinformation and negative information regarding Israel at that time. I did a bit of research on that, and just to give you a clue, and I'm sure our community, by the way, were no different to many other Jewish communities throughout the UK and probably global. But just to give you a clue about the kind of research I did before I spoke, in the House of Lords, there's, as you probably all know, a very anti-Israeli baroness called Baroness Jenny Tong, a former member of the Liberal Party, but now independent. During that week of the Gaza crisis, she spoke no less than 22 times, according to Hansard, about the Gaza crisis, all of which obviously were pro-Palestinian and very anti-Israel. I kid you not that not one Jewish peer during that period spoke up in support of Israel during that crisis. Even Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi, Jonathan Sachs, yes, spoke once, but that was about food aid into Gaza. And when this was reported, I had a couple of Jewish lords contact me telling me that I was wrong. I said I would apologise openly to them and in writing if they could prove me wrong, and none of them did. So our community were absolutely appalled by the lack of leadership, and also by the Board of Deputies. We had a member then at the Board of Deputies of British Jewry, and we felt that they should have been the one voice that was openly promoting Israel's case and defending Israel's case, and their silence was deafening. The anti-Israel media coverage dates back decades. I questioned Lord Michael Grade about a report that was written over 15 years ago called the Baum Report, which has never been published, but was commissioned by the BBC to report then into anti-Israel BBC coverage, the findings of which have never ever been published. Be interesting to see what they found. After that meeting of our community, within a few months, I was asked to become our representative on the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and I took that opportunity and was voted on. Now, I've been on the Board of Deputies for some 6 years now, and when you go to a meeting, usually on a Sunday, currently they're being conducted by Zoom, and there's a banner at the back of the Executive Council, and it says the voice of British Jewry. I'm not sure about your own community, but the Southend community felt that the Board of Deputies had really let British Jewry down, not just during the Gaza crisis, but for decades before. And I think that's one of the reasons where we find ourselves in this position today of growing anti-Semitism and always being on the back foot. So what did I do about it? Well, I joined the Board of Deputies because I thought that would be a reasonable platform to start my pro-Israel political activism. And I also joined a group of guys called New Fair Reporting, a bunch of journalists who work very behind the scenes, reporting to contacts they know in the media about very spiteful anti-Israel coverage and trying to get some kind of, what should we say, acknowledgement that there has been. It very rarely leads to anything other than an acknowledgement printed 5 weeks or 6 weeks afterwards in very small print at the bottom of a page that you can't see. I also started up Southend Friends of Israel, which is another platform for our pro-Israel activity, and on a personal basis started putting out posts on Facebook. Now, from the posts on Facebook, I was contacted by a number of online journals to write for them, and this gave me another platform to espouse my pro-Israel views. Two of those online magazines one is Gatestone from the United States. I've had several articles printed in that, and that gets huge circulation. Another one printed out in Brazil, of all places, but has a huge following in the South American community called Decisive Liberty. And believe it or not, an Islamic journal called Weekly Blitz, published out of Bangladesh, which, although an Islamic online publication, allows a pro-Israel voice like mine to be heard, and that has a very large circulation amongst the English-speaking Islamic community globally. And it was through my contacts of having worked in the Middle East and the business contacts I made out there that allows me to get articles printed in that magazine. Now, we have a clip that we are going to show you shortly from another from a TV channel called Revelation TV, who again, through my online postings, contacted me. Revelation TV are a very pro-Israel Christian channel, and I appear on that at least bi-monthly, and it has a huge circulation, mainly in the Far East Africa, Spain of all places, being a very conservative religious country, let's say, and in South America. But by allowing me to present on that channel gives me the opportunity that I wouldn't get on mainstream media to promote pro-Israel views. So if you're ready to show a very recent clip, just no more than a week ago, between an Israeli citizen and a citizen from the United Arab Emirates, talking about this wonderful recent peace deal that Donald Trump's administration had managed to get together between Israel, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. So if we're ready to show that, let's go ahead.
Between a young Israeli and also a citizen of the United Arab Emirates, talking about this new peace agreement between the two nations.
Salam alaikum, Omar.
Salam, shalom, my friend Hanai.
I see that you have the flag of the UAE, the flag of Israel.
Of course, now it's officially.
I also have the flag of the UAE here in Israel. We all have seen this historic peace agreement between Israel and the UAE, the Israeli delegation that was just in Abu Dhabi to advance these peace talks. What do Arabs in the UAE think of this peace agreement? Is this welcomed?
It is highly welcomed, and everyone's supporting our leaders' decisions and Israeli decisions, and this is for the best interest for both countries, actually.
Do you welcome peace between Israel and the Arab world?
We highly welcome it, actually. You know, after this big step that Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed took, inshallah, we're hoping that many other leaders will take such a step and will get peace in the region and will solve the Palestinian conflict.
Did social media change your perspective of Israel?
Never, actually. We've always known the true intentions of Israel, and that they've always wanted peace, and they always asked for peace. And Egypt has done the first move in the 70s.
Yeah.
And then Jordan, and now us. So we know the true intentions of the Israeli leadership, and we know that they wanted to have peace for a long time.
This is truly a blessing, and I hope that people in the UAE know that we Israelis want peace, not just with the Arab world. We want peace with Palestinians, because conflict never brings anything good to the region. You know, hate brings more hate, and love brings more peace.
We believe that wars brought us nothing but destroyed our ambitions to live and to be happy and secure. And history is the biggest witness for this, because 70 years with hostility with Israel, it wasn't good for both sides. So we need peace and stability to help our countries and Palestine to focus on developing their infrastructure. We hope that we will find a solution for two peaceful countries beside each other.
It's beautiful to see that the Jews and Arabs in the Middle East, we fight terrorism together, and we hope to make this Middle East a better place.
You know, this peace agreement will get us closer, and it will make us a stronger front in front of the terrorist groups.
We all saw videos on social media of Palestinians, you know, radicals that burned images of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed on Temple Mount, a holy site. What do Emiratis, Arab Muslims in the United Arab Emirates think about that?
You'll always find the bad and good. You will never make everyone happy. it's a desire which you will never get. So it's sad to see actually such thing on TV. Shouldn't be talking about people that on that level, as we consider ourselves more honorable than that. It happens to us, it happens to you. They burn the Israeli flag, they burn the UAE flag, so it's on their level, you know. We always follow where we find peace and tolerance.
If Arabs and Israelis are making peace with each other, then what is the reason for the conflict today?
Actually, it's let's say it's not a conflict. It's conflict leftovers that's going to go by time. It's like pain after surgery. So, gonna pass.
What do Emiratis think of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
Actually, what we think that he's a great leader who brought stability for the region that we were waiting from decades to come.
It's a dream of mine to visit the UAE. Are Israelis welcome?
Of course they are. Everyone is welcome to visit. You will see yourself welcomed more than expected.
Thank you so much for bringing peace to the Middle East. It is a dream that is coming true. And so from Israel, I wave the flag of the UAE, and I send my best regards to your country and your people from Israel.
Thank you. And from the UAE, we are sending our best regards to our friends and cousins in Israel.
Okay, so why that's important to someone like myself is because mainstream media would never allow something like that to be shown. It just doesn't happen. And someone like Revelation TV, which has a very decent circulation globally, allows it to be shown. And the Middle East Report, which is particularly relevant, is shown on a Friday evening at 9 p.m. and also repeated on a Sunday afternoon at 3:30 for those of you who are interested. Revelation TV is funded purely by donation. No advertising at all, purely by donation. And it's the type of media outlet that allows someone like myself to continue to promote pro-Israel views. So how do I go about the work that I do? What I'm trying to do is I'm challenging the false narrative that has been promoted for decades about the Jewish state of Israel. Now, what do I mean by the false narrative? I'm pretty sure that most of you have plutzed and years gone by when you've seen a program like Question Time and chaired by either previously the David Dimbleby, and you've always had a panelist, if not two, who are rabidly anti-Israel, and someone who meekly perhaps is on the right of the Tory party that puts up a half-hearted response to some of the disproportionate negative questions that the audience have been allowed to ask. And we hear such terminology as Israel is an illegal state, Israel carries out ethnic cleansing, Israel is an apartheid state, Israel carries out genocide against the Palestinians, Israel has stolen land, etc., etc., etc. These terms have been allowed, these false terms have allowed to morph into the mainstream media for decades, and generations, perhaps the last two generations, and even people of our generation actually believe this fiction to be fact. And I, instead of defending what Israel does, I go on the front foot and I actually challenge the negative media. Now, Israel is great at many things, but what it's absolutely rubbish at, and has been since I've been involved in political activism is public relations. For whatever reason, not since Abba Eban, in my opinion, have we had someone with the eloquence and elegance to promote Israel's case in a media savvy way. There may have been one or two, but they failed miserably. And there is so much weaponry that we have to challenge the false negatives. So, for example, when you hear that Israel is an illegal state occupying Arab land, nothing could be further from the truth. And it doesn't take too much reading or research to understand why. Let me just give you one example. When you hear the fact that Israel is illegally occupying Palestinian land, which they stole and ethnically cleansed the Palestinians. Ladies and gentlemen, I assure you that the legal position is simply this. The borders of Israel, the defined borders of Israel, were defined at the same time as the borders of Syria, Lebanon, and Mesopotamia, current day Iraq. They were formulated in a League of Nations mandate for Palestine. Within that League of Nations mandate for Palestine were two very important documents called the Balfour Declaration and the San Remo Agreement. That was in 1922-23. When the League of Nations was disbanded, it was taken over by the United Nations in the 1940s. Article 80 of the United Nations ratifies all the previous League of Nations treaties. And I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that the legally defined borders of Israel take into account not only the West Bank or Judea and Samaria and Gaza, but actually allow Israel to go further. But nevertheless, the Judea and Samaria and Gaza are within the legally defined borders of Israel. Now, if the UN Charter and the League of Nations mandate were not enough, there are two very important principles which further ratify, endorse, allow, confirm Israel's borders. And those two legally binding principles are simply called acquired rights and estoppel. Now, I'm not a lawyer, believe me, I'm not. But acquired rights is simply that once a nation under a mandate has been given rights, those rights cannot be taken away from that nation. And estoppel is simply the reverse of that. When a nation giving those rights has signed up to them, that nation cannot say, I'm sorry, I was wrong and I didn't want to give those rights. So from a legal perspective, the defined borders of Israel are much more expanded than they should be. Now, I have never heard anyone on TV or in a debate put that forward in mainstream media. I just haven't. And I'm sure that I wouldn't be allowed to anyway. The other thing that's in Israel's favor, I'm talking about the weaponry we have to challenge the false narrative, is simply in the Quran. The Quran, believe it or not, is actually a Zionist document. The Quran, in numerous surahs, promises, bequeaths, bestows the land of milk and honey to the children of Israel. In other words, Israel is God's or Allah or Muhammad's promise to the Jewish people. And do not be misinformed between two things. In the Quran, the children of Israel, the total term given to the Jewish people is very different from when the Quran speaks about Jews. When the Quran speaks about Jews, which it does in numerous surahs in a negative way, they really mean the militants, the ones that were from Judea and were against the rabbinical teachings at the time. So my point there is, when I go and challenge the false narrative, is it's almost Islamophobic to state that the land of Israel belongs to the Palestinians. Jerusalem is never ever mentioned in the Quran, ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk about ethnic cleansing. Every time we hear a pro-Palestinian on one of these debating programs, they'll always talk about the massacre at Deir Yassin, but you won't hear about the massacre of Safed or Hebron or Hadassah, which even predates Deir Yassin. And what about the 850,000 Jews ethnically cleansed from Arab countries? No one ever talks about their rights. And let's talk about stolen land. Do you know, ladies and gentlemen, in the Peel Commission report of 1937, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem actually admitted to his inquisitor, Sir Laurie Hammond, that other than state lands and wastelands, which were not had no deed of title and were owned formerly by the Ottoman Empire and then by the Brits who came in after the fall of the Turks, all other land was purchased by the Zionist movement from usually Turkish or Lebanese owners. So the idea that Jews just came in and stole the land is an absolute myth. It was purchased. And when we talk about ethnically cleansing the Arabs, in 1936, the governor of Haram province in Syria actually admitted that over 40,000, he was worried about losing labor to the Zionists. So Arabs were going from Syria to Palestine because of the economic benefits brought on by Zionism. Now, those 40,000 Syrians were not indigenous Palestinians, but they came to Palestine for work. The number of Palestinians within Palestine at that time was very, very small. So what I'm trying to get over to you, ladies and gentlemen, is if one looks at the facts, if one looks at the truth, one can easily counter and attack the anti-Israel negative that has followed us around for the last, let's be realistic, since the early 70s. I'm coming to the conclusion of my talk soon, but I guess the biggest weapon in my armory is just discussing the anthropological miracle that we call today's Palestinians. And on social media, I've put out a quiz for the last 3 years around New Year, and I asked the following questions. Name any war, battle or conflict fought by indigenous Palestinians, or those that term themselves indigenous Palestinians, against any domestic or foreign invader from 9000 BC to the fall of the Ottoman Empire in 1920. What's the mother tongue of the Palestinians, and what do they call themselves in their mother tongue? What buildings were erected by indigenous Palestinians during that period? What currency did the indigenous Palestinians use? Why is there no mention of indigenous Palestinians from numerous travelers to the area, going back from Andreas de Rayland to Mark Twain to Thackeray to James Finn? No one ever mentions the indigenous Palestinians. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, something that is very true to my heart. If one just looks at the current Palestinian charters, the last one from Hamas was created in 1988. The one from the Palestinian Authority was 1968, which was an update of the one in 1964. I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, if you just read through those charters, they really are puppeting Nazi ideology. They are both looking for, or they both demand, not only the extermination of the Jewish people, or the liquidation of Israel, or the extermination of Zionists, but also the subservience to Islam of all other races and religions by jihad. The Hamas Charter, nauseatingly, goes one step further. If you look at Article 17 of the Hamas Charter, it actually demands the extermination of all those groups, for example, who assist people who are terminally ill with cancer or are suffering from mental illnesses. And I'll take questions on that, I'm sure, later. Now, how can you guys get involved if you want to? Well, there are various ways. There are numerous groups that are pro-Israel groups, especially on social media. In my opinion, the most relevant are the Israel-British Alliance, run by a guy called Mike McCann, an ex-Scottish Labour MP. There's We Believe in Israel, run by Luke Akehurst. There are various Friends of Israel groups, and I think one of the most important ones are UK Lawyers for Israel, run by a guy called Jonathan Turner. Now, there's a lot of heartache that goes with being a pro-Israel activist. It can be very, very depressing, and you get a lot of flack on social media, and you have to be thick-skinned enough to ride over that. But it also can be amazingly rewarding. And I'm going to end up by just giving you an example of how amazingly rewarding it can be. About 2 years ago, the Republic of Ireland legislators started passing some anti-Israel legislation to assist the BDS movement. And this was to make it a criminal offence to buy any goods from certain areas of Israel. If one did, one would be fined 250,000 euros. So I started up a campaign with the acronym BROIGUS, hashtag BROIGUS, Boycott Republic of Ireland Goods and Services. Believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, it caught on. And I had tremendous feedback globally from guys who, for example, had their horses trained in Ireland. Horse racing being a big part of the Irish economy. And they took their yearlings away from Irish racehorse trainers. Some people stopped, some Christian Zionist friends who did a biannual pilgrimage to Ireland, cancelled their bookings. And just friends of people, friends of mine worldwide, just stopped buying goods that were produced in Ireland from the shelves. The recently Irish government was formed about 3 months ago, and they dropped it from their manifesto. And again, this was a behind the scenes, low key campaign, but the feedback obviously got to the Irish legislators. And as I say, it's been dropped from the manifesto, and that's highly rewarding. We're just starting on another campaign because for some reason, the government of Chile, which has a large Palestinian population, is also trying to pass similar legislation. And we're calling this campaign hashtag Boychicks, boycott Chilean exports. So if ever you, and Chilean do some fabulous Merlot, but I'm afraid you're going to have to give that up and put it back on the shelves. And the only other things they do are canned prawns and salmon and that kind of thing. So I don't think you'll have any problem with putting that back on the shelf. To end up with, ladies and gentlemen, some other things that go global. There was a recent, some tourists recently went to the Holocaust Memorial in Germany, and they thought they were having fun dancing. I don't know whether they knew what the site they were dancing on or not, but an Israeli author actually put together a clip and said, this is the type of thing you're dancing on. If we could just play that video, it's extremely powerful and makes what I do so much, excuse me, get very emotional. It makes what I do so rewarding. Over to you.
Sorry, Peter, I say I'm having problems playing it at the moment, so
I
might not
okay.
play it at the moment, but so if I can, I'll let you know.
All right.
No problem. So I'm open to any questions that any of you guys may have.
Okay. Can I was very, I've never seen such a powerful clip as the one with the Israeli boy and the Arab. Egypt, Jordan took, was it 26 years or something to come, to make peace as peace as they saw it. And they never really, I mean, Sadat and they shook hands on the lawn and so on and so on. But I think the people in the Arab countries never really accepted Israel. But when I heard this fellow, I can't remember his name, he seemed so sincere, and the way that he answered and the way that he spoke to the Israeli, I mean, it really took my breath away. I mean, I've never heard an Arab talk to an Israeli like that. Now, it took years and years and years for Egypt and Jordan to get to the board now. I'm praying and hoping that everything goes through. Bahrain seems to appear that they want to join the peace work, and apparently there's a queue of Arab countries that are all eager to make peace. I mean, which I don't think any of us have ever seen anything like that, with such sincerity. With the Arabs, and I just hope that's the way that I'm reading it.
Well, obviously we are. Let's just curb your enthusiasm, so to speak, just a little bit. Clearly, the rapprochement was given more impetus by the Sunni-Shia divide, Iran being the biggest threat to the Gulf states and to Israel as well. And clearly it's a case of my enemy's enemy can be my friend. Now, what gives this added impetus, I believe, and why I think it will continue, is the United Arab Emirates have moved very, very quickly in changing all the textbooks within the educational curriculum, which were previously very anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. They're changing, they've recalled thousands of books from their schools and universities where there's been an anti-Israel slant and promoting a pro-Israel agenda. So in the Arab world, numerous, especially in the Palestinian curriculum, the anti-Semitism is vile. It is similar to the Nazi anti-Semitism of the 1930s. Have no doubt about that. But the mere fact that the UAE and Bahrain are changing their educational curriculum and their textbooks gives me, and all of us, I would hope, a real good feeling that this is not, as you said, a similar agreement, the cold peace that there was between Israel and Jordan, Israel and Egypt. It looks like being something much more realistic and warmer.
Let's hope so. Trump said something this week. Somebody asked him about the Palestinians and their situation, and the Palestinians are sort of a thorn in our side. I'm talking about Israelis, because they've all, whatever anybody has ever said, they've said no. Before the question was asked, they've said no. It doesn't matter what the question was, the answer is always no. They're now getting very, very, very frustrated, because I think they can all of a sudden see that the Arabs are coming down, a large amount of Arabs are coming down on the side of Israel, which for us is incredible. It's not so great for the Palestinians unless they start changing, the way they are. And Trump said that in his speech, that I think it was this week, and he said that there's no question under him, and I don't. Whatever we think of Trump, you can't knock what he's done. I mean, what he's done for all the other American presidents. I mean, he's the only one that's actually done something and that's working. And he said, I've got it written down here somewhere. He said the situation will be resolved in the future, in the near future, he said. I mean,
Yeah.
do you think you can ever change the Palestinians?
Well, there's something else going on here as well. And recent polls throughout the Arab world have indicated something quite unique. For years and years and years, the number one issue in polling amongst the Arab populace was the Palestinian issue, was always a number one issue. That is now demoted to number 6. Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, ISIS, and Turkey expansionism in recent polls have come as the 5 main issues amongst, let's say, educated Arabs. And the Palestinian issue has come number 6. Now, that in itself is a sign that the Palestinians are desperately trying to hang on to their unique position of being the victim that gets paid billions of dollars just to keep on being a victim. So I see, as Bob Dylan penned, the times that they are a-changing.
Are there any questions out there? We've got anybody want to ask questions? Nothing at the moment. Okay.
Come through on the chat as yet. If anyone wants to raise their virtual hand or put a message in the chat.
Right, okay. Well, look, if I can carry on then for a bit. You can't get the clip working. The other one.
No, sorry.
Oh, okay. All right. When we look at what happened in Lebanon a few weeks ago, there's no question that Hezbollah was behind it. Not that they, did it on purpose. I mean, maybe it was an accident, maybe it wasn't. But at the moment, I mean, with the amount of people that were killed, houses destroyed, maimed, and so on and so on, nothing's happened. I mean, Hezbollah, who are unquestionably, at fault. Do you think anything will ever happen? Can they do anything to Hezbollah?
The last I heard was when before I came on to do this talk, that the Prime Minister is trying to form a government, that he is insistent that Hezbollah and their allies, the Druze, give up the ministership of the central bank, and they're refusing to do so. Now, why is that important? Because this will indicate to the world at large where the funds went, and the likelihood is, instead of going into Lebanese infrastructure, they went into the pockets of Hezbollah to buy weapons from Iran. So Macron is also insisting that that role, the central bank ministership role, is given up, and we'll see what happens. I'm sure the Europeans, who I must say, one thing that shouldn't surprise any of you, the lack of leadership from the EU or the few leaders. I think it was only the Hungarian Prime Minister that attended the ceremony between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain, which I thought tells you a lot about the current political thinking within the member states of the EU. But as far as Lebanon's concerned, it's clear that Hezbollah will try desperately to hang on to their position, and it's hoped that ordinary Lebanese will be strong enough to, if not topple them completely from power, weaken their position to a level that they won't be the threat that they have been over the last 2 decades.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. Any nobody's helping me? Okay, I carry on a little bit. Maybe you will try and think of some questions. I mean, because there are so many questions, and we've got Peter here, so I really like to get him going. But the other thing that I was quite interested we discussed is Israel's legal rights under international law, because
yeah. So this, as I say, I'm no lawyer, but I've done huge research, and I don't know whether you can see this, ladies and gentlemen, but there's a book here. It's called The Legal Foundation and Borders of Israel Under International Law, and it's by a gentleman called Howard Grief. And it's 750 pages of the tiniest print. Now, I assure you, I have not read this, but Mr. Grief did us all a favour, and you can find this on, if you Google it, he did a synopsis of his findings, and it's on Native Online, NATIV, and it's literally half a dozen pages explaining Israel's rights under international law. It's a very easy to read document, and anyone who's interested enough and wants to challenge those that say, Israel are an illegal occupier, this 5-page document will put that to bed.
And it's all pro-Israel.
It's not pro-Israel. It's just identifying the legal facts of the case. That's it. Now, when I post my comments, which that I've suggested online about Israel's rights, no anti-Israel activist, no member of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign has an answer for me. The only thing they occasionally come up with are Israel are in breach of the 1904 Geneva Convention, to which I reply that only applies to nation states, and the state of Palestine wasn't formed then, has never been formed. They can't argue, I've never yet met anyone in my 6 years of pro-Israel activism that has been able to argue with Howard Grief's synopsis about the legal rights of the borders of Israel. I tell you the thing that's most depressing to me, actually being a pro-Israel activist, are the number of Jewish people that are, if not outwardly pro-Palestinian, and some of the left-wing groups are, believe me, but what depresses me most of all are the number of Jewish people who are as supportive of Israel as they are of the Palestinians, and without having done the research as to why. And I find that very, very frustrating and depressing, because it's hard enough arguing with the members of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and the BDS movement. It's, if I haven't got enough solace arguing with them, to argue with, let's say the liberal left wing of Judaism is very depressing to me. It's hard work.
Okay. Phil Singer wants to have a word.
Yeah, so a question, thanks David, a question for you, Peter. With everything that happened yesterday in the White House and ceremony and so on with the other countries, do you see this starting a trend, and you just see other countries following on? And if so, which ones and how long?
Okay, well, you're probably not aware, but I'm because of my work, I'm in touch with many embassies, many people working for embassies globally, and people working for various political pressure groups, not only in the EU, but in the United Nations as well. And their feedback is immeasurable. And I'm pretty confident that even if Mr. Trump does not stay as president, and purely from a pro-Israel point of view, I hope he does stay president. That's the only thing in my mind. That's the real axe I have, Israel's well-being, which I think under Trump would be better than under Biden, although I don't think Biden will be a disaster for Israel. But all I can say to you, the anecdotal evidence is that irrespective of whether Donald Trump remains president or not, there will be at least 4 other Arab countries following a similar line as Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. And I expect those 4 Arab countries to be Oman, Saudi Arabia, Morocco and Sudan, and possibly Chad, although not specifically an Arab country, as a member of the Arab League. So yeah, I think the signs look good, and I think the Palestinians maybe are just about recognizing that they're not the numero uno issue in the Arab and Muslim world at the moment, according to various polls and according to the politics that we've seen play out in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I sort of just go in a slightly different directions? Something that's given me a lot of indigestion, and that is what is your opinion of Black Lives Matter? Because I've seen when it started, it was, I mean, it settled down a little bit, but you know, there appears to me to be a lot of Jewish people, mostly young, mostly in the sort of late teens, 20s, which you can use that as an excuse. But there's, you know, there are worldwide, I mean, Jews that you know, that are for it. I can't see what they're doing. What about Jewish lives? What about everybody else's lives?
Yeah, I am not a fan of Black Lives Matter simply because I think its ideology is being taken over by a very aggressive anti-Semitic caucus. So for that reason alone, I'm not a fan. We may say, well, you know, we agree with the ideology and that kind of thing. And of course, when we see pictures, the disproportionate pictures of a black man with a white cop and his knee on the black man who subsequently died, when we see that played time and time again, you get a feel for the what I believe is the disproportionate narrative. So, for example, probably you don't know, but in South Africa, there are 54 recorded murders of Xhosa v Zulu every day. 54 murders, that's recorded murders. The likely level is double that, over 100. And that's tribalism. Now, those are black lives, but no one cares about those Black Lives Mattering. In the last 4 decades, there have been 4 genocides in Africa. There was not one question on Question Time about one of them. There was the Rwanda massacre, there was DCR, there was Central African Republic, there was Burundi, etc., etc. Those Black lives don't seem to matter to anybody. So the Black Lives Matter movement, I'm not a fan of. I think it's dangerous for Jewish people because I think it's been run by a caucus. And just to come back to one other thing, another weapon in my armory, or our army as pro-Israel activists, is to challenge the negative narrative by talking about issues that aren't reported in the press. So I've just given you one example because there are a number of anti-Israel activists in South Africa. And when I point out to them the tribalism between the Xhosa and the Zulu, they kind of clam up. When I talk about the racism, for example, in the Far East between the Koreans and Japanese and Chinese, although I must say, out in the Far East, it's the one continent where probably Israel is actually seen in higher esteem than in any other continent. So it's not such a problem. But in Africa in particular, no one. I'll give you an example where this happened. So do you remember there was that awful event in New Zealand where a white lone gunman went into a mosque and mowed down over 50 Muslim worshippers? Now that was given quite rightly global press coverage. Our chief rabbi, Rabbi Mervis at the time, and the Board of Deputies of British Jews wrote to every, as many Muslim interfaith groups as they could, sent condolences to the Muslim Council of Great Britain, etc., etc., etc. On that very same day, over 70 Christians were mowed down by Islamists in Nigeria. That received zero coverage. I sent an email to Mari van der Zil, the president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and she sent me, I must say, a rather curt response. I pursued it, and to her credit, she apologized and said she would let the chief rabbi know, and I believe that something was sent. But that event, the mowing down of 70 Christians by Islamists in Nigeria on the very same day as the incident in Christchurch in New Zealand, one received global coverage, the other received zero coverage. And that's the kind of mainstream media imbalance that someone like me tries to fight against and expose. And I must say, if we were going back to the 70s, I'd have no chance. But because of social media, which, ladies and gentlemen, I absolutely hate, I hate it, hate it, hate it, but at least I get an almost fair crack of the whip where my voice or our voices have just as much exposure as those that are opposed to the state of Israel, the Jewish people, etc. On mainstream media, we'd have no chance, but at least on social media, we have some kind of chance.
I think that sort of brings me. I think I make the last question, which I was going to ask you, and that was really about mainstream media. It's rapidly obsessive towards Israel now. There are a lot of questions that you're asking and answering, and so on and so on. To me, there's only one answer to everything, and that's anti-Semitism. Because most people, as you said about the Africans and so on, most people don't know. They don't know anything about Jews. They've probably never met Jews. I mean, you know, the percentage of Jews there are in the world, we all know these figures and so on and so on and so on. You know, and I find the newspapers, certainly some a lot worse than others, and I'm not sure if it's getting better. I mean, the Jewish papers obviously made a very, very big thing about this whole thing with Israel making peace. And when you think about it in the world position, I mean, it's an unbelievable, phenomenal thing. But I don't think it was on the front page of any papers. It wasn't particularly on the news. It was there, but it wasn't particularly, wow, what happened, you know. And this is the media now, isn't it? But are they anti-Semitic?
Okay, so my feeling about this is as follows. I've noticed in the last year that the BBC has actually improved slightly, but I assure you that Sky and ITV have reversed that. Sky and ITV, and I'm not sure whether that's because they've employed BBC staff or whatever, but BBC has definitely improved, although Sky, and we know this from the statistics that me and New Fair Reporting maintain about coverage. I'll give you an idea of the type of imbalance that we used to see previously. About 3 or 4 years ago, there was a scene at a checkpoint where a Palestinian activist, a teenager by the name of Ahed Tamimi, slapped an Israeli soldier. It was filmed by her mother, and it went global. The BBC reported that incident on its BBC online text page. If you go on Google and go BBC News Middle East, they reported that incident for no less than 103 days running. 103 days running, and it was there from item number 1 until it went down to about item number 7. but nevertheless it was reported for 103 days running. Now that is the kind of imbalance, negative coverage. Let's be realistic. It's pure spiteful anti-Semitism. Now I've noticed in the last year certainly that although Israel is never given positive coverage, although there was one incident, one article recently, but there's not been the kind of continuous coverage of an anti-Israel article. So I think the BBC has gradually improved, but certainly Sky and ITV, in our opinion, is going in the reverse direction.
Really? Okay. Any other questions or anything? I think it's about time you locked up a little bit. Well, I thought it was a very interesting evening, Peter. And personally, I hope you've all learned quite a lot. And I hope, Peter, you'll be a regular speaker here, especially when something important has happened. And you can tell us all about like the local news and so on. And Peter, as mentioned to you, he runs the South End Friends of Israel, which I would like to join. And if any of you want to join as well, Peter said we can all join. Just contact me and I'll put you in touch with them. So thank you very much for Peter.
David, may I wish you and your community a very happy new year, and thank you for the invite.
Yeah, and I wish you all Kasiva V'Chetama Tova, and hopefully this time next